My name is Ian Harriman. I run corporate social responsibility for a company called Checker, and I have the opportunity today really to help facilitate a conversation with some pretty amazing experts in relation to a really cool report that we'll get into here in a minute. Just to kind of open up why I'm facilitating this panel as opposed to one of the experts here, in the audience or anybody else on the panel today. The company I work for is a tech company, and to add on to that, we are a background check company. That's right. we are the typical bad guy in the room, and we and our industry have done a lot of harm, especially in the space and subject matters that we're all touching today. When I came into Checker about 4 years ago, I didn't understand a lot of this nuance and this complexity. I thought I was just joining a couple of French founders and a really interesting business idea to help build and scale a solution. What I quickly found was that background checks are a problem, a big one, and they negatively impact so many people, and it's kind of an issue that goes unnoticed unless you are here doing the work. So very quickly, we kind of bubbled up these issues to the founders and to the company of 30 people at that time, and everybody agreed that it's our responsibility, being a new take on background checks, to address these kinds of issues. So for the last 4 years, in parallel with my colleague Rahana, we've been figuring out ways to make the background check less of a barrier and more of a solution, both for individuals and also businesses that do want to hire people with criminal records and really tap into a talent pool that is usually overlooked. So over the last 4 years, I've been kind of taking on that fight and trying to really change kind of the perception of background check companies and how they can be used. And through that journey, I've met some pretty amazing people, and I have, like I said, the opportunity more than anything to have a great conversation to share with you all, with the folks here on this panel. So today we have Isa Villarosa, who's Director of Policy and Advocacy at the Insight Center. Rahana Larandro, who's my partner at Checker. She is the Fair Chance Programs Manager. Dr. Odell Johnson, CEO at Research for Social Equity. George Colon, who is Business Account Manager at CEO, which is the Center for Employment Opportunity, as y'all might know. And then finally, Yvonne Silva, who is the Senior Program Director of Criminal Justice and Workforce Development at Code for America. So all of these experts today touch employment, workforce development, services, systems, and policies, which are all centered around the fair chance conversation and movement. And really the conversation today will be based off of the Fair Chance Workforce System Project report. And to give an overview, was one of the authors of that, Isa, so I'll kind of pass the ball that way and let her give an overview of the report in itself.
All right, thank you, Ian. And it's not every day that we start a panel by calling out systemic harm. So thank you for getting our conversation going. I look around the room and I see numerous partners that worked with us to do this report. Dan and Tim from Rise Together. CEO actually helped one of our Fair Chance focus group sessions in Oakland. So for the next few minutes, I will walk us through the report, which Megan did talk about briefly. You have the executive summary in front of you. The full report is available online. We didn't want to send you home with 70 pages, so the 2-page summary will have to do. A little bit about the report. This work really started about a year ago when the Insight Center, my organization, Rise Together, and Urban Strategies united to really look at what does it mean to have a fair chance. And we all know that language matters. Oftentimes we say second chance hiring, but in reality, as the data show, as these focus groups showed, it's quite often not even a first chance. And actually at the prior panel, some of us were in the room. Carla mentioned that 3/4 of the folks in her program had been released and employed in her business, and it was their first job. So even this term, second chance hiring, what does that really mean? A true fair chance. What does that really mean? I have to pivot to click this thing, huh? Oh, thanks, Megan. Hi, Megan. All right, let's go into the slides. These are taken from our report. I thought it would be really essential to compare these two quotes. So up top, we have the Eighth Amendment, this guard against cruel and unusual punishment. And so in our founding, we have this guard against cruel fines and fees. It's not just being drawn and quartered, right? It's civil death. It's a practice that started in medieval times. If someone was declared a felon, you were essentially punished for life. You were stripped of all legal rights. This practice actually still continued during colonial times, and as I suspect many folks believe, it still continues today for many who have a record. The quote here is from a participant in our Solano focus group, and it really, really focuses on this impact, right? So after someone has done their time, the punishment, the harm continues and flows not just from that individual, but onto the folks they love, onto their community, and what does that mean for an entire community's future? Next slide. So I think everyone here knows the essence of these slides, that there are immense barriers, but what we also wanted to highlight in the report is that when folks who have records get hired, they perform just as, if not better, than their peers. I think that's something that came out in the focus groups, but also something we wanted to highlight, that this is a mutual benefit. This isn't just employers, going out on a limb. This is you get real results. And on the flip side of that, in addition to the harmful collateral consequences that folks with records face if they're not able to access the job market, we're also looking at $87 billion in GDP lost each year. So no matter what angle you approach this, from the side of employers, from workforce development, from folks trying to access the job market, this is definitely an issue we need to work on. The slide here is part of Insight's quantitative data. So we looked at the 3 counties in the report, Solano, Alameda, and Contra Costa, and the bottom line is race matters. This is absolutely a racial equity issue. Apologies for these small numbers, but essentially for every $1 earned by a white person with a felony in the Bay Area, Blacks earn 51 cents and Latinx 74 cents. This is also echoed in national data, and as we'll see in a couple slides, this also parallels findings as far as racism in the hiring process. Also related to that last slide, where are folks working? And so we see that the top job of someone with a felony record in the Bay Area, it's around transportation. It's around also, you see the gig economy here, right? So thinking ahead to the future and thinking ahead to intersecting systems, what does this mean to someone who might be replaced by Uber Freight? What does this mean by someone who, because of our licensing restrictions in California, where 1 in 4 jobs requires a state license, if you can't get that, where does that leave folks? This also affects workforce development funding, because while we have historically low unemployment, the best in 30 years, some would say, underemployment and unemployment are not the same thing. So when we look at the top jobs here, are these sustainable jobs? Are these pathways to success? There's a lot to take in, but 2 takeaways with this slide. Insight really focuses on narrative, and part of that narrative is what the criminal justice system and workforce development really developed hand in hand. And as you kind of soak this in, I also want to call out that it's linear, but it's not. So while we might have more positive changes in 2018, there are still many hurdles to get past. So Anne in the previous session talked about child support debt. We have fines and fees still being a really large issue. And going back to the licensing problem, while there was some legislation passed to guard against now you can't look back more than 7 years as far as convictions go, there's really no guarantee. So we do have this continual changing of the law. It's certainly imperfect. And then the last thing to note here is there have been a couple studies quite critical of ban the box. Some studies say that if you implement ban the box, the core issue, and the core issue being that Black and Latinx men are not hired, persists because ... racism. That may be true, but there is something called spillover effect in that right now 3/4 of the country live in the ban the box jurisdiction. And I'll just back up and clarify that ban the box doesn't eliminate background checks. It simply delays it, and your hiring is conditioned. So it's not that you apply and there's a box, it's moved down further in the process and there are additional protections. But the timeline really shows that it's quite new. So I would just add to the critiques of ban the box and say this might suggest more policies are needed, more bias training, more education, and so on is needed to supplement ban the box. We'll probably get into this more in the panel, but part of the reason why ban the box and this research is so hard to track is because the same barriers that folks of color encounter are the same barriers that folks with criminal records encounter. This is due to so many things, systemic over-policing of communities of color that is quite deliberate. But it's also, in our research, we found that there was an assumption of criminality that employers would make. And in other words, an employer was more likely to assume that a Black or Latinx person has a criminal record, even if they don't. And also, our research found that whites with felonies had better chances of getting a job interview than Black and Latinx folks with no criminal record at all. So there's absolutely a racial equity component that can't be ignored. We can spend a bit of time on this slide. This is a slide about collateral consequences, and I think the panelists can talk more to this, but just a few here. As I mentioned earlier, this is really an all-community issue. We have, in the Bay Area, of Latinx folks with felony records, 1 in 4 lack health coverage. Right now, there's some movement around ban the box in housing. Housing is a huge barrier, and it's like the job application process, riddled with these sort of stigma and hurdles that one goes through in the application process. All right, and now I think we'll talk about recommendations.
Yeah, so before we get into recommendations, would love a little bit of reactions from folks, actually. So I'll start with Rahana. I mean, you've built out Checker's Fair Chance Employment Program really from the ground up, which being a tech company in San Francisco at that is really no easy task. How valuable is a report like this to champions like yourself that are starting or thinking about implementing a fair chance hiring program?
Yeah, thanks. Is this working? There we go. I think there are like 2 key words there, and like you mentioned earlier, I am employed with Checker, a background check company and tech company. And so for us, like, we are late to the game in terms of fair chance hiring and fair chance employment. I don't think that you really see active, true hiring happening in corporate business environments at the rate that it needs to. For us, our vision, we hold ourselves to a certain percentage within our program. So we have committed to always having at least, if not more than 5% full-time sustainable employment be fair chance or reentry populations. But our ultimate goal collectively in terms of fair chance hiring broadly is to normalize it. Checker's a 300-person company, and we're going to hear from some of our sourcing partners and folks who we work with on professional and holistic development. We can't hire everyone. It's a highly competitive company to work for and get into. So for me, I think that I'll share more in terms of our learnings on what it was like to build up our program from the ground up within a corporate tech environment, a high performance, highly competitive corporate tech environment. But for me, reports like this help bring to the forefront of the broader ecosystem that, thinking back to the keynote today, Dr. Rojas mentioned that, like, we have a lot of decisions to make and the importance of choices right now. And I think for me, when we look at other corporations, fair chance hiring, I don't see it as a choice. I see it as an absolute responsibility and necessity. And the more of us that have information like this report showing the data, showing the stats, backing up that not only are these programs the right thing to do, they're an absolute necessity for the population and the time that we are living and working in today, when 1 in 3 Americans have a conviction history. That's not a number that you can ignore. So this type of data and report helps normalize fair chance hiring so that when we're getting talent in, we're not the only spot for folks looking to get that, sustainable, long-term, lasting, high-paying employment, and we can really look at more businesses to take this up.
Thank you. As a quick follow-up to that, I mean, me and you personally talk a lot about normalizing fair chance employment in our industry. And we've been doing this now for a few years. We've been going in, and for the rest of you, we're going into organizations like Slack and Salesforce, Square, Caviar, DoorDash, and we're sharing our learnings and really trying to uplift the business value, because everybody needs business value first before doing the right thing, right? So we're trying to have these strategic conversations with folks. But from your perspective, I mean, what do you think some of the reasons are that cause companies to hesitate on creating and building a program, like Checker has?
Yeah, I think Isa just kind of spoke to it a little bit in terms of the bias and the assumptions. Some of the panelists in the previous conversation talked about that hesitation of well, do I really want to employ someone with a conviction history? What's my risk? Negligent hiring myths, yada, yada, yada. So I think that if there's one thing that's most important is that ideological shift in how we think about people with criminal conviction histories, looking at root cause analysis and thinking through if someone has their basic needs met, they're not committing crimes of necessity, they're not strapped for resources. So employment is critical, and especially from a background check perspective, we're in the business of safety. So safety has two sides of the coin. There's the safety of not putting someone in a risky job role based on their conviction history. If someone had a string of DUIs and wants to be a truck driver, maybe not. Let's find you something different. But there is a public safety ripple effect of how it affects our communities when you keep people out of work anywhere. Who can say that that's a good move for public safety? So I think that ideological shift of something that we talk about a lot, of breaking that goodies and baddies mentality, is essential to getting this going. And if businesses can't take that first step, you're not going to be incentivized to change your hiring practices to get the ball rolling.
Awesome. Thank you. Dr. Johnson, you founded Research Institute for Social Equity, which is a social and criminal justice reform research organization. I mean, how do reports like this impact workforce development efforts in communities, just from what you've seen and your expertise and knowledge?
Well, so the report is very significant. And as a researcher myself, really looking at social issues and concerns in our communities, I think that the report, and any report that's really working toward dealing with this humanitarian crisis that we have in the criminal justice system when people are coming out, is a very good report. if I have any critique for the report, it would be, and I haven't seen the whole 70 pages yet, so I kind of want to reserve even critiquing it. But however, the experts really that are in so much research that I actually run across myself, and I'll be looking through all the corridors and all the crevices where research is that the experts, as I see it, and I'm working directly with individuals who are reentering society, are the ones that have had the experience. And so often I never see in the reports of bringing the voices of those people with their lived experiences to the table when these research studies are being done. Because they really are going to be the ones that can give you the information about what worked and what did not work. And so oftentimes we look around, we look at from a holistic standpoint, and we begin to guess at this is probably what's needed, or this is what's needed. And some of those things that we are saying that's needed, we will fund those things and make sure that they're there, but they're not effective because sometimes there's a cross-cultural issue here that's not being also considered. Environmental factors of where these individuals are coming from. It's different from Latino groups as well as Blacks, as we talked about that. It's that the environmental factors are different. The whole cultural beliefs and attitudes and traditions are different. And so the healing methodology would be different in those kind of communities. Because, so for example, say a Latino community would be more culturally, cohesive, as opposed to a Black community would be more cohesively, somewhat in disarray, certainly because of this systemic issues around racism that they have incurred over the last, many years. So I think that the report, so when we're doing these type of reports, I think it's very good to continue to do this type of work, but I certainly think that we should also consider the cultural environmental factors of the groups in which we are researching.
To take from the report directly, in the workforce development section, the report poses workforce development is a key nexus between service providers, employers, and job candidates. I'd love your take on the importance of partnership in this space and how you see partnership between these kinds of organizations tracking towards progress.
Well, just like the homeless system, I know in San Jose that they have the HMIS system. I think it's called the Homeless Management Informational System. And so we can take that type of model and we can be able to offer that to people that are returning citizens, to whereby we can track where they go in regards to if they're going to a provider that provides employment and job readiness services. We can track that. If they've gone to any other groups that's providing employment development services, we can track that too. And they also make it accessible, which is not accessible to the homeless population, make it accessible to the applicants. Also, they could actually enter data about the pathways in which they're taken, the places they've gone. It could be a management system of their job search and their job preparation.
Awesome, thank you.
Yeah.
I'd love to move over to George. George, you have a really interesting role at CEO. But this role allows you to connect and work with businesses that are looking for qualified job candidates. Tell us a bit about that and how you see folks like yourself using this kind of resource maybe day to day.
Yeah, so half of my job is to go out and essentially do door-to-door sales with employers, and have them wrap their head around the idea that it's valuable to look to the reentry population as a source of for employees. But we don't do it by telling them about the social issues and the social impact of making that decision. We do it by telling them about the value that we provide to them as a business, our program in particular, and how it's going to make it easier for them to look to this population. We're going to give them training. They're going to come prepared. They're going to have a good resume. They're going to be professional. They're going to stick around. We're going to back them up. That's the type of thing employers want to hear. This report and reports like this is something that we can deliver to employers to have them wrap their head around the idea of the social impact. And they need to understand it. It's critical that they understand it because we don't want them to just do it because they get tax benefits. We want them to do this because it's the right thing to do. And it's hard to communicate that in a 30-minute meeting. If I could send this beforehand or after a meeting and say, do some research and look into this, and this is not a lot to read, and it's really there's a lot of impact from reading this and understanding it. So it's incredible to have this and to be able to use it as a tool.
Awesome. I'm excited for the kind of outcomes you're going to be able to pull from this, being able to use it in that way. I'm hoping maybe you can share with us, when working with businesses today, like you said, I mean, you kind of framed it in this door-to-door sales kind of painting here, but what kind of trends do you see in services that are most effective in outcomes that are tied to successful employment once you do get somebody to buy in with your salesmanship?
I honestly wish I could say there were trends, because it would mean that we could follow this path and use it and know it was going to be successful. We have to adapt constantly. We have to adapt to a particular employer type. We have to learn new ways of speaking because we want to open up new pathways to different types of employment. So the things that I know that work, probably CBO wide, are trainings. Employers love when applicants come with certifications and trainings and education. That's one thing that I know that works and really catches people. As far as our program is concerned, employers really like we offer 75 days of transitional work. So we're able to see how our participants operate as potential employees, their attendance, their work ethic, their leadership skills. If they work well with a team, they take direction well. So that's big for employers. And the other thing that we do that I think employers really, really latch on to, and it's a great hook, is 365 days of retention. So when a participant gets hired from our program, we don't wash our hands of that participant. We support them and the employer for 365 days. We incentivize the participant to maintain the job. If they're having issues, if they have questions, we're there to back them up, to support them, to help them get through any issues they might be having with the employer. And so employers almost use us like a outside human resources. And if they're having an issue, they can call us too and say, that person needs a discussion about being timely and getting here every day or working a little harder, and we can have that discussion with them, and we do it on a very familiar and a very caring manner, so that the participant feels that they're being heard as well, and that their needs are met.
Thank you. Yvonne, you lead a really dynamic team that develops civic technology, really aimed at transforming the criminal justice and workforce development systems. What elements of this report get you excited about the future of criminal justice reform, kind of in your arena?
Yeah, thank you. One of the things that Code for America does, so we have this crazy idea that government can work dramatically better than it does today in the way it delivers services. It's almost by necessity that we have to believe it, right? Government's made up of people, and it needs to deliver better services, and that better costs less. Less is better. It means it's actually serving a user need, and that people are served with dignity and respect by their governments, and governments understand what constituents are asking for. And so when we think about that in relation to the criminal justice system and workforce development, we're actually saying that the government needs to be transformed in the way it's delivering services to those most impacted by the criminal justice system. And so the way in which the report starts to knit together and make connections across what otherwise might be silos, but are actually part of an ecosystem of how one transitions and how one moves through the world, particularly when you've been swept into the criminal justice system, and what that means in terms of a criminal record ultimately looking like and feeling like a lifelong sentence, even though time has been served, time is done. But also just the wide reach of the criminal justice system now means more people are being caught into the system again and again. And so one of the things that we've done through our work is understanding the user, a user-centered approach. So we're driven by being user-centered, data-driven, and iterative in our work. We build technology to show that government can deliver services better, and we want that technology to be embedded in the government practices. So not to be another government technology vendor, but actually to show that government needs to be a better consumer of technology to deliver services better. And one of the ways to do that is in helping to remove barriers to employment, housing, health by helping to navigate folks through through the record clearance process. And we initially started with connecting folks to find lawyers to petition, to help them file petitions to clear their records under California law. And we recognized a number of pain points and how the system, the petition-based system, to clear your record actually wasn't designed to serve everyone who's eligible today, let alone if we start to think about expanding it. And so you can leverage technology to provide that relief automatically, and we believe the government should. And so one of the recommendations here is to streamline, expand, and automate the record clearance process so that relief is provided automatically. So when my conviction is eligible for clearance, it comes off my record. It doesn't show up. And the government is doing that. I don't have to go through a timely, cumbersome, and costly process when the government actually today has the very data to evaluate that eligibility. And we've been able to show and build technology to show that's possible.
Well, thank you. If y'all haven't seen in some of the local news, Code for America has been highlighted as doing a lot of really cool things with local counties, like San Francisco County. You mentioned employment barriers. These employment barriers, there's an immense amount, and they're typically driven by public policy. So, you called out expungement pathways, but are there any other barriers that are prime for reform, in your opinion?
A lot of them. Licensing reform. Policy are just a bunch of choices, and so government can make a number of different choices. I also think one of the things that we find, it's not about reform, so not to answer your question directly, but there are a number of reforms that have been passed that we need to hold ourselves accountable to implementing them and to engage in what we call the messy business of the machinery of government, making sure that they're actually implemented. Fair chance laws are incredibly impactful laws. Have we provided folks with the tools to actually understand their rights under those laws, engage in those rights within the time window allocated under the laws, and then hold employers accountable and begin collecting data to understand at a state level, at a regional level, which employers are showing up in compliance and which aren't, and then how do we create additional reforms on top of that to put those mechanisms in place? And so I think there are a number of reforms around records and how they that to expand eligibility for the kinds of convictions that can get record relief. Providing that relief automatically is another element of reform. Licensing reform needs to be implemented. It was passed, some reforms passed last year, fully implemented, and where we see in the implementation that more needs to be done because from a user perspective, if it is not actually serving the ultimate user need, we should understand that, name it, go back and make that additional reform.
Yeah, agreed. We think a lot about passing and changing laws, but the implementation of laws is almost its own beast sometimes that we don't spend a ton of time, I think, thinking about as advocates or as specific service providers in spaces. I'd love to kind of transition the conversation to some of the report key takeaways, which I thought were super valuable given your kind of role and place within reentry. So Isa, after you were looking over the finished report, what key takeaways from the report stands out to you as providing the highest impact across stakeholders?
Yeah, so first of all, 70 pages is a lot. And that question, Ian, that you posed is something that I hope folks here can also dive into because when we did the focus groups, one of the first things that we noticed is this chasm between the focus groups with folks who have criminal records trying to access the job market, and folks who are part of policymaking, folks who are part of workforce development, right? There's this chasm between the promise of the law and what is actually in practice. So I think one of the key takeaways is really what is the bridge? The bridge, in part, is we need a greater infusion of humanity across these systems, whether that means can we be better about not just ban the box, but getting folks good jobs. So recalling that slide where the number one job of folks with felony records in the Bay Area, truck driving, construction, these are not livable wages, right? When we think of the various mechanisms that both folks of color encounter, with or without a record, and folks who are justice impacted, there are certain strategies that employers will use. So one is called downward channeling, and it's when someone is told, oh, you shouldn't be in the front of the store, you should be a stock person. There's another thing called shifting standards. So these are real techniques that are quite documented, where two candidates, say a black candidate and a white candidate, will apply for a job. The white candidate will be told, oh yeah, your skills totally qualify. The black candidate with the same skills will be told, oh, you don't quite have what it takes. And when we did focus groups, and this is true of both this project and some other projects Insight's done, we hear soft skills a lot. And soft skills is often coded for that something else, that bias, right? There's a lot there. It's tricky to define. Other coded language we might find, I talked to an employer the other day, and he was in the construction field and said, I only want to employ men who look hard and have tans. And in addition to the numerous problematic things in that statement, not all of us tan, right? So it's how are we going to get past the coded language? How can we get to a greater sense of humanity that's not just in the statute, right? How can we make this more about the real human lives that are at the core of this?
Thank you. Just for time, there's a lot I'd love to dig into that, but would love to get Rahana's kind of opinion here. I mean, there's so many moving parts on the employer side of things when engaging in fair chance hiring, and a lot of the recommendations and some of the key takeaways address those. But from your opinion, how can employers simplify everything going on in their world to move from considering people to actually employing people, which is where the big impact is?
Sure, yeah. Fair chance hiring versus fair chance consideration, right? Like actually getting butts in the seats. I think that I've really enjoyed all of the content today. The last panel, my fellow millennial called out, she said that there's really no excuse not to employ fair chance talent. And I think that really resonated with me, and that's essentially like what I think it takes is like cut through the bullshit, remove the excuses, whether it's bias. One of the bullet points that I'm really excited about is like partner strategically with your CRA, your background check company. I work for a background check company. I know it is perfectly possible to be a fair chance employer and use background checks. We're also a tech company. A couple blocks from our office, there's now a coffee shop run by robots. If y'all can figure that out, we can figure out how to employ folks with criminal records. I think that like the key thing that we have to do is stop making excuses and just do it. It's just not that hard. Like we have done this within a year and have seen amazing success thanks to the resources of things like this data, holistic coaching with the types of services that Odell provides. CEO is one of our sourcing partners. We have expungement processes. All the tools are there. It takes the will and really holding ourselves accountable to getting it done.
Really well put. Speaking of holistic care, Dr. Johnson and I were chatting before the panel, discussing the report and just some things that go on at Checker, and he brought up the idea of burnout, which is something that I think about, or probably my wife thinks about more than I do about myself. But it's something that I feel like doesn't get talked about a ton. So, Dr. Johnson, like, How does mental health play into the experience of candidates engaging in workforce development programs and in employment with the ultimate goal of sustaining that employment long term?
Well, it's a very significant ordeal. I mean, mental health is often it's not talked about. I really like to kind of talk about it from a trauma perspective. Uh, so oftentimes when I'm working with individuals that are coming out, and I say, so what do you want to do? I need a job. I need a job. So the job is the first thing that they talk about. So I say, what about housing? Maybe you need housing first, and then you get a job. No, I need a job first. So money becomes their focus, making money so they can get back on their feet and be able to take care of their kids. They begin to start taking on all these responsibilities in their mind that I need to give back to the people I've harmed, meaning my family, my children, whoever I've been away from, my mom. They've been calling me and coming to see me all those years or months, whatever that is. So the monetary aspect is the lead kind of indicator of most people that are getting out. And so in talking with individuals, I say, how do you? And really, they really show up on the job. These stats that we have out here about people that have been formerly incarcerated really can be even a better employee than those that have not been there. So they show up really, really hard on the job. They show up and they want to get in there and get that promotion. So they'll come in early and they'll stay late. I had one individual say, I said, well, how do you roll in this job? Well, I show up early and I do my work and I stay late every day, right? And I say, well, is there room in there for self-care? Do you take care of yourself? Well, I'm not worried about that now. So I just want to get in here so they can see that I am not that person that that has been stigmatized, because my supervisors, they know that I've been there. And so I really got to show up 3 times and more so than the average individual that I'm competing against that's probably have not had the experience of criminal justice harm. So anyway, so they show up and they continue to just kind of engage with that process of working very hard. And so at some point there's a burnout period. All of us burn out, whether you've been to jail or not. So you're kind of on this track and you're moving forward for a year straight, and you got a promotion, you got a few things happening, and you even encouraged to go a little bit higher, and you continue to work like that. And so the stats is that within 0 to 3 years, most people recidivism happens between that time span. So then you begin to see people falling out. So when employers are now beginning to get into the fair chance hiring, they need to really consider put an emphasis on the individuals that are coming in. They're going to work hard. They're going to be loyal. They're going to be faithful. They're going to be so appreciative for this opportunity, because sitting on the other side of those walls, you're thinking like, I don't have a chance when I get out there. What am I going to do? Particularly for those that have been the lifers that have been in jail for more than 25 years, and now they're finally let go. So oftentimes those lifers probably actually were incarcerated when they were teenagers. And some maybe in their mid-20s, but now they're in their 40s and 50s, and they're very frightened about getting out. Some tell me that I don't know if I want to go back out there. I don't know what I would do. I was 19 when I came here. And so thank God that a company like Checker and a few other companies in the Bay Area are providing a platform for me, because I just didn't know my parents are gone. I don't have any support systems. All my support system is in here. And so it's very important even for workforce development providers to understand that a person has done 2 years compared to 25 years. It's a different kind of process. So when you are engaging with them and counseling them, that you got to understand those dynamics and differences. So you got to actually guide them and direct them in a different kind of way. You got to understand this is trauma. It's not just, get out, get a job, and be happy, everything's going to be okay. I've seen many that have failed because the trauma was not dealt with. The trauma, not the trauma that they actually just experienced inside, but the trauma they experienced before the crime happened, that led to the crime, that led to the incarceration, and then the reentry process, which is like a whole new rebirthing of trauma. So definitely, self-care is a very big deal. And so I'm hoping that that Sheikh R will certainly consider bringing some kind of self-care encouragement in. You can't force anybody to take care of themselves, but you certainly can create a platform, to whereby they can understand how this is going to benefit and help sustain them in the community and reduce recidivism.
Thank you. George, one thing Rahana and I go round and round about with checker customers and businesses, just in general in this space, is accountability. So when you think of, I guess, how do you think of accountability when it comes to fair chance hiring? There's a lot of businesses that are interested and they talk a big game, but how do you think about them actually following through and what accountability really looks like by an employer?
There is none right now. In 2016, Obama had the Fair Chance Summit. Companies like Coca-Cola, Pepsi, Xerox were there, and they all pledged to hire from the reentry population. But they didn't say how many. They didn't say how often. They didn't say when. There's no accountability. There's no oversight. If a business is interested in really doing this, there are a slew of organizations that they can reach out to really do it and hold themselves to it and say, we're gonna make this difference. We're gonna make this change. We're gonna move ahead. We're gonna help. They need to make that decision and reach out and contact the organizations that can help them to facilitate that need. And it's not, of course, I'd love it if businesses reached out to us directly, but there's building opportunity for self-sufficiency. There is legal services for prisoners with children. There's a ton of organizations in the Bay Area alone that they could really hold themselves accountable by just reaching out and having that discussion. The more people that go out and let businesses know you need to do this. This is not just something you can ignore and say, oh yeah, I'll look into that and maybe think about it. No. Do it. Because I assure you, if you're running a business and you do it, you will see that there's tremendous value in it.
Thank you. I mean, speaking of just kind of the influence of the federal government on these kind of things, Yvonne, I would love kind of your perspective with, landmark policy changes recently, like the First Step Act, for example. How important is it for states to continue to lead the charge on reform in this space, given states have been the ones kind of signaling and gaslighting a lot of these laws?
I feel like there's only one answer to that question. It's really important, but it has to be led, just to what Dr. Johnson had says, it has to be led by individuals who are directly impacted, because that's how policies are informed that actually serve the end user need. And that needs to happen. It needs to happen in states across the country. So if we're thinking about reforming the criminal justice system, what we actually need to be thinking about is how do we bolster the safety net? How do we bolster education? And how do we create the conditions by which the criminal justice system is actually much smaller, if it exists, right? And so, but I think that it's critical that reforms across the country are led and designed and fully informed by directly impacted individuals, and their experiences are centered to the work. And politics are politics. And I think that those are choices that we make when we have a first step, and not actually a robust policy that holds us accountable to outcomes that we are looking for. And so I think we can all do that in our communities and in our regions and in states. Yeah.
Thank you. Just with the being conscious of time here, would love to talk a bit about opportunities for action. So kicking back over to you, Isa, I mean, when thinking about a post-Fair Chance report world, everybody's processed and kind of internalized and had a good understanding of the information coming out of this report. I mean, what does the world look like from there? What gets you most excited?
Yeah, so at least 12 times this afternoon, we've all checked our phones, right? Well, at some point, if y'all could either tweet or share some love for Debtfree Justice California's bill that's currently in the Appropriations Committee. It's called Families Over Fees. and it seeks to eliminate administrative criminal fees across the state. This was something that was done in Alameda to the tune of $24 million. In San Francisco, $30 million were eliminated, and this is really a push to eliminate what is keeping so many people from, as Dr. Johnson mentioned, rebirthing trauma of continued debt. In addition to that, just calling out the danger of these jobs. So there's a study in which folks who were admitted to the military under felony waivers, and this is America's oldest employer, it was found that they had better rates of promotion. They were better employees in numerous ways, and yet they had an 80% higher risk of death. And that is not because they were careless. That was because they had a 3 times higher chance of being placed in a high combat position. So in looking at this, as you said, the post-Fair Chance report world, part of this will just be pushing us all to be better. So it's not just about, can we get someone a job? It's, what does that job look like? What does that job entail? And are we continuing to do harm?
Thank you. Rahana, the role employers play in fair chance hiring is a huge one, and maybe that's an understatement. But what would be your call to action for employers that are either halfway bought in or kind of dipping their toes into the water on this in this area?
Yeah, I'll try and be brief. Call to action, I feel like I've said it a couple different times, like, we are living in the height of mass incarceration. There have never been more people locked up in the history of the world than today. 95% of them are coming home. For employers, that's your workforce. This isn't a subset of a population. So you actually, as an employer, in my opinion, do not have a choice to ignore this population. We're talking about, low unemployment with the caveats that you mentioned earlier. Not only is this a population that is taking up a huge portion of the workforce, but like George and others have mentioned, this is a badass group of talent. So the call to action is like, show up, practice accountability, even though there isn't some body holding us to it, and understand that this is going to be good for your workforces, for your products in terms of like putting people most impacted at the center. Stop ourselves from making things that are going to be more harmful because we don't have representation from the community. I don't see a downside. I think the call to action is, I don't know what a call to I don't have a reason not to. So yeah, I don't have one specific call to action.
All action.
Yeah, just
all action.
do it.
No, I love it. Dr. Johnson, how can workforce development programs scale their impact for folks who are system impacted on the lines right now looking for employment?
Well, I think that, so we have this dynamic that I think is also not going to be considered. We have communities, the Tenderloin, we have Bayview Hunters Point, we have pockets in Oakland where people don't come outside of their communities. And you all would never engage with them if they're looking for a job, particularly those that are coming home from incarceration for long periods of time. We have other kind of dynamics like gang activity where you can't walk across the street, you can't go on this side, or you can't ride this bus. And those people are not going to risk their lives to come to you to get a job. That's a whole segment of our community that we're missing. So I think we have to go where they are. We have to go to the churches in those communities. We have to go to the community centers. We have to go to the library and set up shop and partner with these organizations, because these particular entities want that, but no one is coming to them with that ideology. Let's come and let's work together and partner with you on these levels where these individuals are. We have 5 keys that's driving a bus around that's been modified and makeshift into a high school. And they're driving them to Hunters Point communities. They're driving into these areas that are heavily populated with gang violence and murder and mayhem. And they're going and they're getting results. People are getting their high school diploma and their GEDs. They're coming off the hills and they're coming down across the street and sitting on this bus with a qualified professional that's teaching them, that's compassionate about what the mission is of what that entity is. And so I think that workforce development needs to get up out of these silos. Where they are, a little bit more, and come and find those individuals where they are and meet them where they are, because otherwise we're gonna miss an opportunity to really engage with that community that really needs the help the most.
Thank you. George, I mean, kind of looking holistically at service providers, I mean, from your perspective, how can service providers like a CEO be better leveraged within the larger Fair Chance ecosystem?
How can we be better leveraged?
Yes.
We need. There's a. I don't know how long. I've been doing this for almost 2 years. There's a drastic lack of collaboration. The organizations need to work together. They need to communicate. We all have the same goal. So it's very strange to me that we compartmentalize ourselves and say, well, we're going to do this and we're only going to do this and these are our companies and we're only going to work with these people. Why? If we all work together, there's plenty of jobs for everybody. There's plenty of opportunities for everybody. We can probably affect change a lot faster and a lot more efficiently if we collaborated more. So that's something that I think CEO has been working on quite a bit over the last few months, is reaching out to other community-based organizations, particularly right at home in Oakland, and making sure that we know what each other is doing and offer assistance to the other CBOs.
Thank you. Yvonne, I wanted to save this at the end, and I kind of hinted at it a bit earlier, just given all the buzz and kind of exciting progress. I know I've been really excited about it. Would love to hear about your vision for auto expungement of criminal records and really talk a bit about how big of an opportunity and how much of an impact that'll make.
Yeah, absolutely. In transforming the way the government is delivering services to those most impacted by the criminal justice system, one of the ways in which we see that they can do that is by providing record clearance relief automatically. Every state in the country can do it. And there are a bunch of policy choices that may or may not need to be made. Some could actually do it right now under their current structure. One of the things that we've shown, last May we launched a pilot in California, in 5 California counties, San Francisco being the first, San Joaquin and Los Angeles and Sacramento, and then we are about to announce our 5th county. And the pilot was aimed at showing that you can clear the marijuana convictions automatically. So Prop 64 was passed in 2016. There's a petition-based process to get your marijuana convictions cleared that are eligible. In the 2.5 years since the passage of Prop 64, 3% of people eligible petitioned the court. The process is bullshit, and so it's no surprise that there's a low uptake in accessing the relief that's available under law. It's true across remedies, whether we're looking at Prop 47, Prop 64, other relief under California law. And so the DA in San Francisco said, I'm going to take a look at all marijuana-related convictions and take an affirmative look and provide relief affirmatively without a petition. That was the start of a relationship, because when we asked, how are you going to do that? The office said, paper, people, and overtime, because we as a matter of policy, understand our role as a prosecutor's office and understand in charging these crimes, but also understand the larger context in which drugs are criminalized and the criminal justice system exists. And we had built at that point a early technology that could read a state criminal record, parse the information, pull it from the criminal record, evaluate it for eligibility under record clearance laws in California, and generate automatically the output that would be filed with the court. And we thought we would do this with individuals because there aren't enough lawyers in the state to serve the up to 8 million Californians with criminal records. But when we saw this opportunity, we said we could actually help you do that very quickly. And so the 9,300 convictions in your jurisdiction we can do in a matter of minutes. And so the passage, so that launched the pilot. The California legislature then passed, and Governor Brown signed, a bill called AB 1793 that put that into place statewide. So the California Department of Justice provides criminal history data to every DA. The DA has a year to review for eligibility. There's a presumption under Prop 64, so they're looking at a pretty narrow level of discretion. And then the court next July would effectuate the relief that for any conviction that is not challenged by the DA. And what we've been able to do is do that data analysis component in the middle exponentially faster than would otherwise happen. So what we understood was it takes an attorney about 15 minutes to review a criminal record, evaluate eligibility, and leveraging technology and understanding users and user need, we're able to read 500,000 lines of criminal history data in 90 seconds. So we can understand how many people are eligible and generate whatever outputs necessary by the court. And so it's really exciting because it shows what's possible when we start to rethink a process. It doesn't have to be this way. The government can make another choice, and we as constituents and voters can make another choice. And so there are 3 bills this session, one that would do the exact same for convictions eligible for reclassification under Prop 47, another that would actually move several convictions as well as arrests, provide relief automatically at the state level, so there is no there's a small window for DA review, and then another that helps to improve the data quality so that we can actually provide. California is really setting then the stage nationally for automatic record clearance. And our work has, as you mentioned, has been covered quite a bit, because when you think about it, why do folks have to apply? The data is there. You can write policies that then provide eligibility pretty clearly and run that analysis and provide the relief. And so it's really exciting work, and we're seeing it happen states across the country, not just around marijuana, but also other convictions. So when we think about barrier removal, that barrier should be removed automatically.
Thank you. And with that, first off, would love everybody to give a hand to our panelists. And want to open it up for questions. Having all the experts here in one place, it's a great opportunity.
Okay, so this is a comment rather than a question. I just wanted to amplify what Isa said about debt-free justice. The bill that you were talking about is Senate Bill 144 by Holly Mitchell on eliminating criminal justice administrative fees. Rise Together had a Sacramento Advocacy Day last month, and that bill was one of the few that the Advocacy Day that I participated in focused on. So Rise Together has taken a position in support of that bill and has been lobbying our Bay Area legislators on that. That's definitely a very important bill.
Thank you so much. And just to echo that, part of the reason why it's stalled is critics say, oh, it's too expensive, this is a source of revenue, but the reality is it's really not. This isn't, when we look at the panoply of fees that are levied on folks, they're largely not collected. So it really only serves to put folks either back in some sort of situation of incarceration, and it's not a moneymaker as some county folks or others would say.
Thank you.
I was thinking of this morning's keynote speaker, and we're the list of jobs that are most likely to be filled, or the careers in construction and truck driving. I mean, those are sustainable jobs if they're union jobs. And we didn't talk about labor much, but I'm just wondering how does labor play into fair chance, a fair chance workforce?
Yeah, the question was with all the industries that are kind of beachheads for fair chance employment, how is labor taken in consideration with employment from a reentry perspective? Anybody want to take that one?
Sure. So the majority of the participants that come into our program say that they want to work in some sort of industrial field, construction, truck driving, moving companies, like stuff like that. We want to work with the unions more than they seem to want to work with us. We have a really difficult time with a lot of the unions getting them to really get behind the idea, which is odd because there's a mass. They need people so badly. It seems like they're searching everywhere except us. So we have partnerships with the unions. They provide program participants with incredible jobs, wonderful benefits. It is sustainable. So is truck driving, but there are significant barriers to getting those jobs for the reentry population, and the number one is getting a driver's license again. It's so difficult. There's so many fees. There's so many hoops they have to jump through, and you pretty much can't work in the construction industry without a driver's license. Even if you're not getting behind the wheel of a vehicle ever. So that's the thing that we have to struggle with, and we're finding ways to kind of assist with that and make it more attainable, easier for them to get through that process and get those good jobs. But the other thing is we want to balance that. We don't want everybody going to construction. Not everybody wants to work construction. So this is why this is so important, because we need more industries to get behind this idea and look at the reentry population as potential employees.
Thanks, George.
I would just say that in the research we found that the laborers union actually is actively hiring people. They have a center out in Pleasanton, and there's a number of others. So it's not all the unions that are negative.
It most certainly is not. Absolutely. And the laborers union, the Pleasanton office has reached out. It becomes a little difficult because most of our program participants live in Alameda County, and just that little bit of distance, again, because of the driver's license barrier, can cause a big differential. What we have to do is we have to leverage those connections in those locations that do want to work with this population and say, can you call your chapter here in Oakland or in San Francisco or in San Jose and help them wrap their head around this idea?
I feel like the truck driver job has been mentioned multiple times. We all hear about self-driving cars and the potential for automation. What, if any, steps are being taken to make sure that these jobs are not just transitions back into society, but are sustainable for the future? I realize it's a macro conversation.
All good, yeah. So the question is, with the rise of automation and kind of the future of work in jeopardy a bit, what kind of protections, what's being done to make sure automation isn't taking these kinds of jobs that are ripe right now for fair chance?
Sure. I don't know about the self-driving cars, but in terms of like automation, and I'll take that to a place that I understand a little bit and tell me if this is answering your question, but like automation and jobs within the tech industry. When you think about a tech company, like not everyone within the organization is actually doing coding, is actually doing software development. So for me, I think that in the face of automation, thinking about it from the perspective of like the companies that are driving it. And I do think that it is a real concern in terms of automation removing jobs. I don't have a solution to that. But I think it goes back to like what George just mentioned, like every single industry needs to be practicing fair chance hiring so that as the landscape of employment changes, we still have opportunities for folks, whether that's like you can come work at a tech company that's doing some type of automation and you can work the front desk, you can work on my team, you can work in sales like Ian, you can work in applicant support. There's a ton of jobs within an automation business that are not going to be like wiped away. But I think that the concern of the landscape changing and automation removing jobs is a really serious problem, and I don't have a specific answer to that if other folks do.
one little piggyback, somebody needs to fix those vehicles. That's the reality of it. I mean, if they can drive themselves, that's fine, but they can't fix themselves. So as the landscape changes, we need to develop training programs that specifically target the reentry population to give them the skills that they need to be able to fix and address those issues, and give them that chance.
And I can speak briefly to what the Workforce Development Boards are doing. So through the Workforce Innovation and Opportunity Act, WIOA, because everyone loves acronyms, there's a small pot of money that's been allocated challenging workforce boards to fund reentry-focused work more, and automation is an issue they're looking at. However, what we're hearing is that one, the funding is quite small, and two, data collection is a huge problem. So when we talked to the Solano Workforce Board, they estimated that they'd served several hundred folks with records. However, officially in their data system, they've only served 18 in 2 years. And what that means in terms of a system that is funded based on these supposed outcomes where we do have to put a label on everything, it's super problematic.
And the only other thing I would add just on data is when we're user-centered, data-driven, and iterative, you understand labor markets and where those trends are coming. You make different choices around licensing, or you start to shift and make choices around where the outcomes aren't being shown, that then the money is actually flowing to the more effective programs. And I think the ability for government and communities to be able to make informed decisions in real time based on that data is going to be really critical to that, right? Because it's not just automation is taking jobs. It's actually, we understand fluctuations in the labor market, and how do we make different choices about those, but also how do we provide, it needs to be paid training. It needs to be paid training that leads to the jobs that are actually available. And we need to understand and hold accountable that the data that's being collected and the outcomes that are being sought, if they're not being sought, we need to pivot and try something else.
Thank you. Is there one more question here? Yep.
Approximately 100,000 baby boomers are retiring every day. And a lot of these baby boomers are going to require in-home care as they're getting older. In-home caregiving is one of the fastest growing occupations in our country. I wonder if there is an effort to bring this population into the in-home caregiving profession, especially for females.
So to reiterate the question, with the rise of baby boomers retiring, there's a huge need for in-home care. Is there anything going on to organize folks within Reentry and Fair Chance to help solve this problem?
I'm going to answer this in two parts. So very often, the reentry population has experience in that realm, men and women, because they do it while they're incarcerated. So they have that knowledge already. They have that job experience. They know how to care for people properly. As an example, Homebridge out of San Francisco reaches out to us regularly to look for our program participants to do in-home care jobs. Again, driver's licenses. It just, they need to go from place to place, have all the supplies in a car, and it's just not viable. The other issue is the in-home care jobs really don't pay that much. You build relationships, you build rapport with these people, and you see them deteriorate. They deserve to be paid more. And so I think if there was a discussion about increasing the rates and doing something to, I mean, we like I said earlier, we help with the driver's license aspect, but doing something to kind of reduce that impact of the driver's license, or the need to go from place to place at a distance, I think it'd be a lot easier for us to get our program participants into that realm. But the doors are open, and we work on it regularly.
And just tying in George's point about natural caretaking, when we look at women of color, there's caretaking happening across generations, whether it's caring for someone older or younger. And when we've done focus groups and folks with criminal records are asked, what's your dream job? We do often hear, oh, I'd love to be a nurse. I'd love to be a caretaker of some sort. And unfortunately, this is where the licensing restrictions do come into play. And looking at the average pay of a nurse and the average pay of a home health aide, for example, it's substantial. In California alone, there are 4,800 laws that have some sort of licensing limitation impacting justice-impacted folks. So it's tricky.
Thank you. Okay, one last question. It looks like we got time for one more. Yeah.
You know you can. Please.
Hey.
Yeah. That's great news. The last time I had gone out to your location in the city, there was the driver's license need was there. If something's been updated and changed, that's wonderful to hear, and I can't wait to talk to you more about it. Yes, thank you.
Awesome. Great. Well, with that, one more round of applause for the panelists here.